Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a room lined with tatami mats, where the scent of hinoki cypress hangs in the air, and the soft hush of a paper shoji screen slides open on the first blush of dawn. You're barefoot, you're groggy, and you're a samurai. The sword lies beside your futon. But unlike the flashy, blood-slick fantasies of modern pop culture, you haven't used it on a human being, ever. You mostly use it to slice radishes when your wife's not looking. Because it's 1663, the Edo period, and your biggest worry this morning is whether your lord's rice tax report is due or overdue. The world you live in is peaceful. So peaceful, in fact, that the thing you fear most isn't battle. It's boredom. You rise with the sun because that's when respectable men rise, especially ones on stipends. The birds are chirping, the incense is already burning, and you know the carpenter across the street sharpens his tools exactly 5 minutes from now. He's never missed a morning. Life here runs like a koto string, tight, deliberate, and liable to snap under pressure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slide open the door and peer into the garden, stone path, perfectly raked gravel, and a pine tree shaped like it's been politely disciplined into elegance. The cherry blossoms are not in bloom, but you pretend they are anyway. The mind needs something to romanticize. Back inside, your wife is already awake, quietly folding bedding. Her kimono is plain but neat, blue-gray with a faded crane design. She nods, says nothing. Words in the morning are like wasabi, best used sparingly. You pull on your hakama pants and stiff outer robe. The kataginu shoulders jut out like aggressive origami, making you feel important, even if all you're doing today is reviewing tax records and inspecting rice barrels. You pause at the sword stand. You've got two. Your daisho set, the katana, of course, and the shorter wakizashi. You buckle them on anyway because that's what's expected. No one actually duels anymore, but it would be unthinkable to appear before your superiors half-dressed. The weapons are mostly ceremonial, like a necktie that could technically decapitate someone. Your servant enters with breakfast, rice, miso soup, a few pickles, and grilled fish that smells like someone tried to set the sea on fire. You nod politely. No thank yous. Gratitude is assumed. You eat slowly, mindfully, the way you were taught. It's not just breakfast. It's a performance. And outside, the world is quiet. Edo is bustling, somewhere, but not in your compound. You're in a samurai district, after all, with wide roads, proper fences, and no street vendors yelling about dried squid. Occasionally a dog barks, but it's probably one of those pampered ones wearing silk ribbons. You can't prove it, but you swear that dog's been mocking you. You stretch. Your joints crack. You're 37, which in your world means you're due for a midlife crisis any moment now. You remember your father at this age, stern, serious, mildly terrifying. You, on the other hand, just considered writing a haiku about laundry. The thought passes as you prepare to head to the magistrate's office. Your duties today include mediating a boundary dispute between two rice farmers who've probably been angry since childhood. It's your job to listen patiently, nod sagely, and pretend you understand irrigation math. This is the real samurai life. Land disputes, agricultural quotas, and knowing exactly when to look stern. On the way out, you bow to the family altar. You never met half your ancestors, but you still thank them for your rank. It's the polite thing to do. Also, you suspect they're watching. The candle flickers like it agrees. The walk to the office is short. You pass a few other samurai, some older, some younger, all dressed like migrating crows, black, stern, slightly hunched from years of formal seating. You nod once at each, perfectly timed. Too early, and it's desperate. Too late, and it's disrespectful. Social navigation here is a martial art all its own. At the magistrate's compound, you slide your feet along the path. Samurai don't stomp. You enter the hall, remove your sandals, and step onto the polished floor. Your superior is already seated, Lord Hoshino, a man who's never laughed in front of another human being. You bow. He nods. Nothing is said. Perfect. Your first meeting of the day, a merchant accused of smuggling rare Korean ginseng. The evidence? A tea box that smells like ambition. You ask questions in a slow, rehearsed voice. He lies in a slow, rehearsed voice. You both know it's theater. Ultimately, you let him off with a warning. It's not justice. It's practicality. You need this man's tax money next season. Historians still argue whether the Edo period's peace was enforced by strict law, cultural conformity, or sheer economic inertia. Maybe it was all three, but what's certain is this. For nearly 250 years, samurai like you mostly kept the peace, not with swords, but with silence, posture, and well-documented rice ledgers. You return home as dusk stains the sky pink. Your wife greets you with tea, and your daughter shows you a frog she found. You feign terror. She giggles. You smile. This is the closest you'll come to actual battle today. And yet, you feel the weight of that katana across your hip, not because you'll need it, but because if you don't wear it, the illusion crumbles. You're still a warrior technically, even if your fiercest enemy is a ledger error, and your greatest victory is avoiding paperwork resubmission. You step out into the morning light, blades at your side, and realize something quietly absurd. You haven't drawn your katana in over a decade, and no one expects you to, because in this peaceful age, being a samurai means carrying a sword, not using it. The streets of Edo whisper with motion. Merchants open up shop fronts in the distance. A tofu seller sings his prices in a soft, nasal chant. But in your neighborhood, strictly samurai, things are muted. No vendors, no noise. Everyone here is armed and anxious about protocol. You walk toward the records office, where most of your day will be spent not on strategy or swordplay, but reviewing rice stipends and confirming that a man named Ichiro did, in fact, plant enough barley to qualify for his grain rebate. You are, to put it kindly, swordless in the city. You weren't trained for this life. Or rather, you were, and then the world changed. After the great battles of the Sengoku period, Japan finally stabilized under Tokugawa Ieyasu. The Tokugawa shogunate brought peace, long, stubborn, bureaucratic peace. And with it came a strange, slow transformation of the warrior class. Samurai went from battlefield commanders to state functionaries. Not overnight, but gradually, like how tea cools without anyone noticing. You were born into this new era, early 1600s, when war was already becoming history. You trained with swords, yes, but your tests now involve accounting, etiquette, and the ability to drink sake without embarrassing your house. You remember your sensei's voice. A samurai must be prepared to die at any moment. And yet, this morning, your biggest concern is whether your sandal straps will hold up through the walk to the rice granary. Some historians suggest that many samurai resented this peacetime life. Others argue they thrived in it, enjoying the prestige without the danger. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between a scowl and a shrug. You're certainly not complaining, not while enjoying warm miso soup and a predictable pension. At the granary, a clerk bows so low his forehead nearly polishes the floor. You return the bow, exactly 30 degrees, the proper depth for one of your rank. It's not about humility, it's geometry. Everything in your world has a proper angle. You examine the warehouse records. Each sack of rice is tagged, logged, weighed. It's your job to ensure these records match the figures submitted to your daimyo, Lord Tanabe. If there's a discrepancy, someone loses their stipend or their head, depending on how dramatically they react. Today, everything checks out, except for one crate marked with an unfamiliar crest. You raise an eyebrow. The clerk sweats immediately. Turns out a low-ranking cousin of a courtier tried to smuggle in his private stash for personal emergency rations. You sigh. You've had this exact conversation 4 times in the past year. You confiscate the rice, record the offense, and let him off with a formal warning written in brushstroke calligraphy that takes longer to compose than it would to just yell at him. And still no blood spilled. You head to the calligraphy school next, not to learn, but to supervise. Your own handwriting is elegantly functional, according to your wife, which is code for no flair, but legible. The students sit cross-legged, gripping brushes as if they're unsheathing tiny swords. The instructor bows, and you watch them practice kanji for honor, loyalty, and fish. One boy is clearly hungry. You remind them that a true samurai must master both the pen and the blade. You don't mention that one is now more dangerous than the other. Political slander, after all, is far riskier than a duel these days. Outside, the weather shifts. A gentle drizzle begins to mist the stone walkway. You pull your sleeve over your hand as you open your umbrella. It's made of oiled paper and bamboo, utterly useless in wind, but beautiful enough that you don't mind getting wet. On your way home, you pass a younger samurai practicing his sword kata in the rain. His movements are crisp, fast, theatrical, too theatrical. You stop and watch. He notices and stiffens. "You should slow your stance," you murmur. "Your hips outrun your heels." He bows deeply. "Thank you, senpai." You nod and continue walking. You used to be like him, hungry, fiery, convinced the world was just one political assassination away from erupting into war again. But the older you get, the more you understand. Peace is a performance too, and it requires daily rehearsals. There's a saying, katana no wa, yasuragi no katachi. The sword's ring is the shape of peace. You always thought it sounded poetic. Now you realize it's just ironic. The blade only keeps the peace if it's never drawn. You reach your compound, where your daughter is feeding koi in the garden pond. She's named them after famous generals. "This one is Nobunaga," she says, pointing to the chubbiest one. "He tries to eat the others." You chuckle. You suspect Nobunaga would find that hilarious. Inside, your wife is arranging flowers. Ikebana, the art of floristry turned almost religious in its formality. She frowns, adjusts one stem by a fraction of an inch. You've seen her start over entire arrangements because one leaf drooped too boldly. You think of how your sword used to matter. Now it's your posture, your bow, your penmanship, your self-control. You've fought no battles, yet you feel the slow exhaustion of quiet warfare, of maintaining dignity in a world that rarely requires courage, but always demands composure. You kneel at your writing desk that evening, finishing reports. The candle burns low. Your hand cramps. You remember what your friend Ichikawa once said after a long day of ledger work. "I would rather be shot with an arrow than write another rice tax exemption." You laughed then. You still do. But you also know he meant it. There are rumors, of course. Rumors of restlessness among the younger retainers, of secret duels in the mountains, of Ronin with vendettas, but none of it touches you. Your world is tidy, dull, predictable, and strangely comforting. You roll up your scroll, seal it, and stretch. The sword on its rack gleams faintly in the candlelight. Untouched, revered, useless. Still, tomorrow you'll wear it again, because in this world, appearance is everything. even if you're swordless in the city. You trudge into the records hall again, and the first thing you see is a neat stack of folded paper, smooth, unblemished, a small mountain of bureaucratic doom. This, more than any battlefield, will test your mettle. It's rice season, the time of year when every peasant's output gets tallied, taxed, and turned into hard numbers that decide your stipend. You thought becoming a samurai meant heroic duels under moonlight. Instead, you've become an unwilling accountant in stiff robes, haunted by ink smudges and decimal errors. Today's assignment: reviewing tax submissions from 3 farming villages under your jurisdiction. Each comes with beautiful brush-written reports that look like poetry, until you realize they're trying to disguise yield shortfalls under layers of flowery metaphors. One village describes their rice as modest but spiritually abundant. Translation: "We didn't grow enough again. Please don't cut our funding." You sigh and dip your brush in ink. You have your own method for spotting creative bookkeeping. You draw a neat line next to every suspicious kanji, circle the poetic bits, and compare numbers to last year's output. You may not be a warrior on the field, but by the gods, you're a menace with a ledger. Rice in this era is currency. Samurai stipends are measured in koku, a unit equal to the amount of rice needed to feed one person for a year. Your family receives 120 koku annually. That's enough to live decently, maybe splurge on a new teapot, but not enough to retire or buy your way out of a bad harvest. You've learned to watch the rice records like a hawk. One miscount, and you'll be explaining to your wife why the winter kimono budget just evaporated. As you read, your assistant, June, quietly enters. He's a nervous lad with impeccable handwriting and the voice of a startled cricket. "Apologies, sir," he whispers, bowing so low his nose almost meets the tatami. "There's a discrepancy in the Kuramura totals. The field census claims 37 workers, but the rice output suggests only 30 were working." You stare at him. "And you're telling me this? Why?" He swallows. "Because one of them is listed as a ghost." You blink. Turns out an elderly farmer passed away mid-season, but his family kept submitting rice under his name, perhaps hoping no one would notice. June, bless him, is too terrified to confront them. So now you have to write a tactful letter informing the village headman that unless spirits have taken to farming, someone's about to lose a portion of their stipend. Historians still argue whether Tokugawa-era tax systems were harsh or merciful, whether they uplifted the peasantry with stable governance or smothered them with inflexible quotas. But from your seat, it feels like juggling teacups during an earthquake. You finish the morning with an ink-stained sleeve and a sore wrist. Your wife insists on rubbing a poultice into your fingers, some herbal remedy that smells like pickled seaweed but actually works. She clucks disapprovingly at the blisters. "Samurai hands shouldn't look like fisherman hands," she mutters. You smile. "Better that than losing our tea money." After lunch, steamed egg custard, and a pickled plum. You head to the stipend office to finalize the paperwork. Another day, another brush. The clerk at the desk looks equally exhausted. "I envy the monks," he mutters as he hands over your documents. "They pray all day, and nobody asks them about surplus grain." "True," you reply, "but we get better shoes." You both laugh, which is dangerous in a room full of scrolls. One loud snort and someone's year's worth of inkwork could blow across the floor. On the way home, you run into your neighbor, Lord Minagawa. He's an elder statesman, mostly retired, with one eye that permanently squints and a small white dog that clearly believes it's in charge of the entire block. "Ah," he says, stroking his beard. "Back from battle?" You nod. "Lost 12 to poetry." He chuckles. "I lost 12 to accounting. We should erect a war memorial for all the ink we've spilled." You part ways with an exaggerated bow, both fully aware you're joking, but also, maybe, not. That night, your children ask to hear a story, not a bedtime one, a war story. They want drama, swords, glory. You hesitate. You've never seen battle. You've trained endlessly, yes, hours of sparring, years of posture drills, days spent polishing blades that never cut flesh. You know how to fight. You just never had to. So you borrow. You tell them a tale from your grandfather's campaign during the Battle of Sekigahara. How he stood in the rain, ankle-deep in mud, surrounded by shouting men and flashing steel. You leave out the part where he actually served as a supply officer. Doesn't matter. They're asleep halfway through. Anyway. You step outside into the courtyard. The night air is crisp, the stars bold and indifferent. You stare at the moon for a while. The katana at your hip feels heavier than usual. Maybe guilt, maybe gravity. You think of the other samurai in your precinct, all of you bound by the same contradictions, trained to kill, forbidden to fight. A warrior class kept idle by the very peace it's meant to protect. There's an old phrase, "No sword draws blood in times of harmony." But that doesn't mean the blade loses its edge. It just waits. And in the meantime, you file rice reports. You wake before the rooster, not because of duty or honor or any grand notion of self-discipline, but because your back hurts from sleeping on a futon that's half padding, half poetic suffering. Outside, the sky is ink blue. A breeze tugs faintly at the garden lanterns, and a pair of crows argue over something only crows care about. You stretch slowly, quietly. Your joints pop like polite firecrackers. Your wife is already up, kneeling at the hearth. She's whisking tea with the focus of a military strategist. The chasen, that spidery bamboo whisk, blurs in her hands, frothing the matcha into a pale green cloud. You nod to her, and she slides a bowl your way without a word. The morning tea ritual. No talking, no slurping, no eye contact with the existential dread of another day of paperwork. It's meditative, this little routine, and deliberate. Every motion, measured, every pause intentional. The Tokugawa elite have turned tea into something more than a drink. It's a philosophy, a calming ceremony before the day unfolds, one that involves sitting silently, appreciating the steam curling from the bowl, and pretending you're not already thinking about which report you forgot to file yesterday. You sip the tea, bitter, earthy, a flavor profile best described as damp scroll storage, but comforting somehow. After tea comes the tenugui towel routine. You wash your face with cold water, dry it with a neatly folded cloth, and then change into your robes. Today's outer kimono is slate gray with a subtle pattern of cranes, your family crest embroidered in white on the back, just in case anyone forgets how important or not you are. You pause in front of the household shrine. Incense already smolders in the tiny bronze dish. You clap twice, gently, to greet the spirits, bow, and whisper a small request. No grain disputes today, please, or at least let the liar be obvious. And then you move to the most sacred space of all, the breakfast mat. This morning it's grilled mackerel, pickled radish, and rice steamed so perfectly it might make you cry, not because it's emotional, just because you're pretty sure this is the only part of the day that's going to go smoothly. Your daughter sits across from you, poking at her food with theatrical boredom. "Father," she says, "are you ever going to fight someone?" You pause mid-bite. "Why?" you ask carefully. "Because Yukio's father says real samurai duel at least once." You swallow. "And what does Yukio's father do?" "He makes umbrellas." "Ah, a lethal profession," she grins. You do not. You know what she's really asking. Are we the heroes or just the extras? In this age, the line is blurry. You finish breakfast, bid your family goodbye, and set off toward the precinct hall, but not before completing your morning kata. Yes, even now, you still run through your sword forms in the yard, every morning, like clockwork. You draw, you step, you swing, slow, deliberate. The blade moves like water, if water were made of very sharp, very judgmental steel. A neighbor passes and bows slightly. You bow back, sheathing the sword with a satisfying click. No blood, no opponent, just air. But it still matters. Some say the katana was the soul of the samurai. Others argue it was mostly a soul that stayed tucked politely at your waist while you took rice inventory. Either way, you keep it sharp. At the hall, your first task is reviewing reports from the temple district. It seems a group of monks are accusing a merchant of placing his stalls too close to their purification path. The merchant insists the monks are just mad because he undersold their incense. You sip tea, not your tea, precinct tea, which tastes like boiled regret. You listen to both sides. The monks quote scripture. The merchant quotes prices. After an hour, you settle it. The merchant moves his stalls 3 tatami lengths back, and the monks agree to bless his new location. Everyone bows, problem solved. No duels, no yelling, just geometry again. Historians still argue whether these forms of conflict resolution reflect a mature society or simply one terrified of rocking the boat. The Edo period prized harmony, even if it meant suppressing every instinct to scream. You head to the training hall next, not for battle. Today is etiquette refresher training. Yes, really. The junior samurai are being lectured on how to sit properly during court presentations. You observe them from the rear, arms crossed. One boy shifts and earns a swift correction. Don't move your knees like that unless you're preparing to commit seppuku. You suppress a smile. You remember your own lessons, hours spent kneeling on hardwood, practicing how to bow, stand, bow again. You wonder how many nations train their warriors by first teaching them how not to offend someone's grandmother. Afterward, a colleague waves you over. You're being requested at Lord Tanabe's residence this afternoon. You raise an eyebrow. Requests from your daimyo are rarely optional, so you go home, change into your formal wear, and polish your sword. Not to use it, but to reflect better in the sun. Then you walk across town, robes billowing slightly in the summer breeze, and arrive at the residence with just enough sweat to be dignified but not desperate. Lord Tanabe greets you with the serenity of a statue. He's in his 60s, mostly eyebrows and authority. He offers tea and small talk, which means he wants something. Eventually, he clears his throat. "There's talk," he says, "of a visiting envoy from Satsuma. You may be asked to receive them as a neutral party." You nod, carefully. Satsuma is far. Their politics, prickly, their swords, famously not ornamental. "Neutral, my lord?" you ask. He smirks faintly. "As neutral as anyone holding a katana can be." That night, you sit on the porch with your wife. The cicadas are singing like the world's most annoying choir. You sip plum wine. The stars blink overhead. "You know," you say softly, "sometimes I think I missed my calling." "As what?" she asks. You sip again. "A monk. They get better tea." She raises an eyebrow. "They also get up at 4. You both chuckle, then lapse into silence. It's a good silence. Earned. You sheathe your thoughts like your sword, quietly, carefully. You haven't fought today. You've mediated, practiced, bowed, written, and kept the balance. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. The training hall smells like old wood, worn straw mats, and just a hint of yesterday's sweat. You step inside and immediately regret wearing your formal robe. It's far too thick for what's about to happen. The weekly sword drills, held rain or shine, heat or humidity, or, in today's case, both. The younger samurai are already lined up, practicing kata with the intensity of men who believe danger lurks just outside the gate. You know better. The only thing outside is the noodle vendor and a very lazy cat. You step onto the mat, bowing slightly to the instructor, a wiry, white-haired man named Master Fujikawa, who hasn't smiled since the previous shogun was alive. He nods in return. "You're late," he says, "though you're on time. As you stretch, your joints complain again. You used to love these drills. Used to imagine that one day you'd need them. Now they feel like a formality, something between exercise and performance art. You draw your bokuto, a heavy wooden practice sword, and move into the first form, a step forward, a sweep, a pivot, all as smooth as the ink in your calligraphy set. The younger men glance at you, gauging your form. You pretend not to notice, but you do. Of course you do. Swordsmanship here is theater, controlled, rehearsed. You haven't faced a real opponent since that unfortunate sparring match with Ichikawa last year, where you both managed to dislocate something important and then had to limp home pretending nothing happened. Halfway through the session, Master Fujikawa calls for sparring pairs. You're partnered with Haru, a brash 22-year-old who always seems to be balancing on the edge of something. Enthusiasm, recklessness, or just his own untied sandals. You bow. He bows. You both raise your swords. Then he lunges. Fast, wild, improper. You sidestep, strike his arm gently, and before he knows it, his sword clatters to the floor. He stares at it like it betrayed him. "You overreached," you say quietly. He frowns. "Isn't that the point?" You almost laugh. "Not if you want to stay on your feet." He bows again, lower this time. Not defeated, educated. Historians still debate whether Edo period swordsmanship was a real martial art or mostly ceremonial by that point. What's clear is that many schools focused more on posture, form, and symbolic technique than actual battlefield utility. But don't tell that to Haru. He's still hoping for a war. After the drills, you sit on the porch of the dojo, sipping barley tea with Fujikawa. The old master watches the younger men pack up. "They all want glory," he murmurs, even though they don't know what it costs. You nod. They think peace is something you wait through. "It isn't," he says. "It's something you work at every day." You look at him. "You ever wish things had stayed chaotic?" He's silent a moment. Then, "No, but I do wish I had fought once, just once, to know if I could." You sip your tea, not answering, because you've thought the same thing in the quiet of the night when the sword glints too brightly on the wall. You walk home under a sky thick with clouds and gossip. Edo's alleys hum with quiet speculation. A courtesan disappeared from the Yoshiwara district, someone says. A ronin was spotted near the outer gates. You hear the rumors. You file them away, like haikus written in bloodless ink. Interesting, but probably fictional. Back at home, your son greets you at the gate, waving a tiny wooden sword. He swings it at your shin. "I'm a samurai," he declares. You stagger back, theatrically wounded. "Not in the knee. That's where I keep my taxes." He giggles. Your wife sighs. You're encouraging him again. You wink at her. "Better here than in the garden. Last time he tried to duel the scarecrow." Later in your study, you unroll a new sheet of paper and begin a poem. You find that after sword drills, your brush flows smoother, like your body, rhythm loosened. You write a verse about rain, about fallen leaves, about the sword that sleeps beside you like a pet tiger. You pause, then add a line about tea. Your brush drips slightly onto the mat. You curse under your breath. Your daughter calls from the hallway. "Father, did you stab the ink again?" "No," you call back. "The ink attacked me." She laughs and runs off. There's something deeply ironic about it all, how you spend your days training to kill, knowing full well you'll never be asked to. It's like being a chef who only slices air. You don't resent the piece. You're grateful for it. But a small part of you wonders what your hands were made for. If not for war, then for what? You hear a distant clap of thunder. Tomorrow you'll return to the dojo. Haru will be more cautious. Your muscles will ache slightly less. The master will correct someone's grip with a sharp tap to the wrist. And you'll repeat the same forms, again and again. Because this is the real discipline, not preparing for war, but committing to peace with the same intensity. Repeating, refining, and respecting a craft you'll hopefully never need. Your sword rests on the stand by the window, still sharp, still waiting. The city doesn't sleep so much as hum. You notice it most after sunset, when the cicadas stop screaming and the lanterns bloom like soft fireflies along the streets. Edo becomes theatrical after dark, not in battle, not in danger, but in drama, and no place captures that better than the kabuki theaters. You trudge toward one now, slipping past narrow alleys and curtain-fluttered doorways. Tonight, your lord has granted you and several fellow samurai leave to attend a performance at the Nakamura-za, one of the 3 licensed kabuki theaters. "To maintain cultural refinement," he said, with the gravitas of a man reciting an edict. You suspect he just wants fewer complaints from his bored retainers. At the gate, you remove your sandals and step inside. The air is thick with incense, anticipation, and powdered wigs. You take your seat near the back, where your status permits you a decent view, but not so prominent that you have to actually pretend to enjoy the play too much. The stage is bold and bright. Red curtains, gold-painted columns, paper fans the size of dinner tables. The music begins, shamisen strings twanging like gossip, and the actors step into view. Men dressed as women, women played by no one. Female actors were banned. And dramatic facial expression so intense they'd melt under modern lighting. You squint. Isn't that actor playing the grieving widow the same man who sold you pickled cucumbers last week? Yes, yes, it is. Kabuki is a strange, beautiful thing. Equal parts soap opera, moral lesson, and scandalous fun. The actors move like dancers, then pause. Striking exaggerated poses that make the audience gasp in admiration. You try not to gasp, but you do a little. Tonight's play is a classic revenge tragedy, full of oaths, secret identities, and hair that somehow remains perfect through sword fights. Everyone pretends it's noble art, but really it's gossip in costume. You glance to your left. Lady Kyoko, your cousin's wife, is whispering furiously into her fan. Her friend gasps. You catch the words illegitimate heir and his third wife. You look away politely, which in Edo society means focusing harder without moving your head. Your friend Ichikawa leans over. "You think that's about the play?" he murmurs. You shake your head. "No, it's about Minagawa's nephew. Again." You try to focus, but your ears catch every rustle of silk, every sharp breath. The kabuki hall is less a theater and more a pressure cooker of unspoken feuds and thinly veiled insults. For a warrior class with no wars to fight, court drama fills the void. Intermission. You step outside, grateful for the fresh air. The street buzzes with people pretending not to look at each other. Someone in the crowd hisses your name. You turn. It's June, the young assistant from the records office, clearly panicked and wearing a hori 2 sizes too big. "Sir?" he gasps. "There's a problem with the merchant documents." You sigh. Of course there is. Back at the office, because yes, you go there during intermission, June spreads out a scroll on the floor. "This merchant claimed a cargo of rice came in from Shimosa province," he says, pointing. "But the ink here, see? It's the wrong formula for that region." You blink at him. "You can tell that just from the ink?" He nods, proud. "Shimosa uses oak soot. This is pine." You stare for a long moment. Then, finally, "You need a hobby." Still, he's right. This scroll is a forgery, but not a dangerous one. More like a tax dodge. You write a warning, stamp it, and tell June to deliver it first thing in the morning. Then you rush back to the theater. Too late. The third act has started, and your seat has been stolen by an old man who pretends not to see you. You end up squatting beside a pillar, knees popping like tempura. On stage, the climactic duel happens in glorious, bloodless pantomime. Swords flash, wigs fly. Someone cries out, "Vengeance!" while falling dramatically to the floor in slow motion. The crowd erupts. You clap politely. You've seen better choreography at the training hall, but hey, at least no one dislocated anything this time. After the performance, you and Ichikawa wander toward the tea houses. Not to drink, but to decompress. You pass a row of establishments glittering with lanterns, their Norin curtains swaying in the night breeze. From inside one, Laughter spills out, high and practiced, the kind that's designed to flatter the men paying for it. You catch a glimpse, geisha in delicate kimono, playing shamisen, pouring sake, smiling at jokes that don't deserve it. Another layer of performance in a society already steeped in role play. I envy them sometimes, Ichikawa murmurs. You arch a brow. The geisha? He chuckles. No, the ones who get to laugh without consequence. We smile wrong, and someone writes a scroll about it. He's not wrong. In this world, your face is a diplomatic weapon. You've had entire weeks derailed by an ill-timed smirk. Historians still argue whether kabuki served as cultural expression or subtle political satire. Probably both. It gave the common folk a way to parody the elite, and gave the elite a mirror they pretended not to see. As you return home, your wife waits with a half-asleep smile. Good performance? She asks. You shrug. More costumes than action, more gossip than plot. So, like our life? You grin. Exactly. You undress in the dark, careful not to wake the kids. Your robe folds neatly. Your sword goes back on the rack. You sit at the low table for a while, eyes unfocused. The moonlight casts soft shadows across the floor. You think about the theater, the masks, the poses, the drama, and realize you're still performing every day. The temple bells begin before dawn, deep, echoing tones that roll over rooftops like soft thunder. You stir in your futon, not annoyed, but vaguely contemplative. Bells mean it's a holy day, not a major one, but enough to complicate your schedule. You sit up slowly. Your wife is already awake, folding robes in the hallway, humming a tune that might be religious or might just be stuck in her head. Your children sleep on, tangled in blankets like sea otters. You go through your usual rituals: tea, face washing, a long glance at the sword stand. But today, you add one more step. You change into your formal Montsuki kimono, black with 5 white crests. Not your favorite, it itches at the collar, but appearances matter, especially when you're about to visit the head monk at Daijoji Temple to discuss, of all things, a boundary stone. Yes, a rock. It seems the temple claims a certain stone in their garden marks an ancient territorial divide, while a local merchant insists it's just a decorative rock placed by his grandfather. The difference? About 8 square feet of gravel, a few ferns, and someone's pride. You arrive at the temple after a slow walk through tree-lined paths, where moss climbs the stones, and even the wind feels respectful. The monks greet you with low bows and patient smiles. You bow in return, counting to 3 in your head to avoid overdoing it. The head monk, a man named Rensho, leads you to a small room with tatami mats and sliding screens painted with cranes. He serves you tea, then begins to explain at great philosophical length why the rock matters spiritually, historically, and, you suspect, financially. Halfway through his explanation, he pauses. Of course, he says, the stone itself is not important. It is merely a symbol. You nod wisely. Ah, but symbols once argued over become real. He beams. You've just passed the monk equivalent of a pop quiz. You spend the next hour gently mediating between him and the merchant, who arrives late, sweaty, and full of opinions. You propose a compromise. The stone remains, but a small wooden sign clarifies that both parties agree on its shared importance. No one gets full victory. Everyone saves face. It works. The monk bows. The merchant bows. You bow. The tea is refilled. Historians still argue whether Tokugawa peace was held together by strict enforcement or just relentless bowing. From your perspective, it's the latter. You step outside the temple and linger a moment. There's a koi pond near the veranda, and you sit by it, watching the fat, silent fish drift through water so clear it reflects your entire face. You look tired, not from combat, but from calm. A soft footstep. A young monk approaches. Forgive me, he says, but I recognized your family crest. Are you the same man who settled the rice merchant dispute last month? You blink. I am. He smiles, relieved. Thank you. That merchant funded our new roof. We were concerned. You bow slightly. I'm glad no roofs collapsed. He bows lower. No, just egos. You walk home the long way, passing through narrow streets where the smell of grilled eel mingles with temple incense. Edo feels unusually quiet today, perhaps because of the holiday, or perhaps because the wind is carrying everyone's thoughts inwards. You stop by a tsukimono shop to pick up pickled radishes for your wife. The vendor nods. Samurai discount, he says with a wink. It's the same price as everyone else, but the gesture counts. At home, your daughter is kneeling beside the family altar, adjusting the incense. You join her, lighting a fresh stick and watching the smoke curl like calligraphy into the air. She asks, "Do you think the ancestors are watching?" You consider the question carefully. If they are, I hope they're impressed by how many meetings I survived this week. She giggles, but her eyes remain serious. You decide to tell her something your father once told you. We carry our swords for show, but we carry our names forever. It feels dramatic the moment you say it, but she nods like she understands. And maybe she does. That evening, you receive an unexpected visitor, a fellow samurai named Kondo, an old sparring partner who now manages a shipping checkpoint on the Sumida River. He brings news and some rice crackers that are definitely stale but offered politely. I hear Satsuma envoys are really coming this time, he says. Not just talk. You frown. Here? He nods. Here. within the month. That changes things. The Satsuma domain is powerful, distant, and famously independent. Hosting envoys from there is like inviting a tiger into your tea room. You can't act scared, but you also can't pretend it's a cat. They'll be watching everything, Kondo adds. How we bow, how we serve food, how we hold chopsticks. Perfect, you mutter. Another chance to impress strangers with table manners. He laughs, but not very hard. This peace, it's steady, but not immovable. You walk him out under the lantern light, both of you wrapped in thoughts you don't say aloud. What happens if peace falters? What if the role you've perfected becomes obsolete overnight? You watch the night sky a long time after he's gone. Then you turn back inside. Tomorrow there will be more forms to file, more disputes to smooth, more monks and merchants and polite lies disguised as compromise. But tonight, for just a moment, you let yourself imagine what it would be like to unsheath your sword for real, not to hurt, just to remember what it feels like. You awaken to a sky stained red with the blush of sunrise, the kind sailors and poets claim predicts trouble. You're neither, but your instincts stir a little. Something is off, not in the air exactly, but in the quiet hum of your house. You dress with care, a touch faster than usual. Today is not for tea and minor quibbles. Today the Satsuma envoys arrive. You've been briefed twice. The shogunate is playing host, and your precinct has been tapped to assist in receiving the delegation, not because you're high-ranking or particularly political, but because, according to your superiors, you're measured, dignified, and less likely to say something sarcastic in front of a feudal warlord. Unfair, really. You adjust your kataganu, those stiff, wing-like shoulder extensions that make you feel like a disgruntled origami crane, and head toward the southern reception hall. The building is clean, its floors polished with such obsessive care that you worry your sandals will squeak and shatter the illusion of stoic perfection. Outside, the advance guard waits, heads bowed in synchronized anticipation. You take your place, and then they arrive. The Satsuma envoys step out of their palanquin like stage actors timed to a drumbeat. The lead man wears the traditional two-sword daisho with confidence, his kimono dyed a blue so deep it borders on arrogance. He doesn't bow immediately. He surveys. You bow first, precisely 30 degrees. He returns it, barely. It's subtle, but there it is, a test. The first move in a political dance where everything is unsaid but understood. He introduces himself as Lord Saigo's second cousin. You wonder if that's a lie meant to impress you, or a truth meant to intimidate you. Hard to say. His eyes never blink. You lead them through the entrance, flanked by junior retainers who have never looked so nervous. You remind yourself to breathe with your stomach. That's what your instructor always said. A samurai who breathes shallow thinks shallow. In the reception chamber, The formal greetings begin. Bow, speak, pause, sip tea, compliment the weather, then bow again. It's like kabuki, but quieter, and the stakes are higher than applause. The envoy compliments your poise. Your bearing, he says, is remarkably still, like a statue carved in the moment before a strike. You nod. And your words are sharp as lacquered steel, my lord. He smiles, just a little. The game is on. The meeting proceeds with carefully worded nothingness. Trade routes, poetry, fish. Yes, fish. Satsuma is known for sweet potatoes and sea bream, and somehow that becomes a half-hour exchange involving symbolic interpretations of carp. You nod sagely throughout, even though you've never thought deeply about a fish in your life. Historians still debate whether these diplomatic meetings ever meant anything, or were simply rituals designed to create the illusion of control. But here, in the soft light of sliding shoji screens, control is everything. A spilled teacup could spiral into a scandal. A misplaced proverb could offend a clan. So you keep smiling. Later, after the envoy departs to his lodging, you and your colleagues debrief in the corridor. Ichikawa fans himself dramatically. He stared at me like I'd stolen his childhood. Be glad he didn't speak to you, you mutter. He complimented my stillness like I was a decorative pond. Someone else chimes in. Did you see his servant swords? Identical down to the carving. That's not style. It's a message. You all fall silent at that. You return home late, footsore and eyelids heavy. Your wife greets you with a look that asks everything without words. You shrug. They bowed? We bowed. We talked about fish. She pats your arm. A thrilling exchange. Your daughter peeks from behind the curtain. Did you fight them? No, you say, pulling off your sandals. We defeated them with courtesy. She frowns. That's boring. You laugh. That's diplomacy. The next morning, a formal letter arrives requesting your presence at a cultural demonstration for the Satsuma delegation. The demonstration? A poetry reading. You sigh into your rice bowl. At the appointed hour, you kneel in the hall of seasonal paintings, surrounded by scrolls and silken fans. You recite a waka about plum blossoms and the pain of impermanence, which you wrote 10 years ago during a particularly awkward family gathering. The envoy listens with closed eyes, nods slowly, and says, "A lovely reflection on fragile strength." You thank him. He adds, "A bit long." You smile politely while making a mental note to trim 3 lines and possibly write a revenge haiku. Afterward, he requests a walk through the gardens. Alone, you obey. The two of you stroll among the gravel paths in silence, save for the crunch of your steps and the faint flutter of a kite somewhere overhead. Finally he says, "You do not crave war." You pause. "I do not." "Many in Edo pretend they do not," he continues, "but their fingers twitch on their hilts. Yours do not." You choose your next words carefully. It's not fear, it's purpose. Peace is harder, but more useful. He studies you. I wonder, he murmurs, if the peacekeepers are stronger than the conquerors. You don't reply, because maybe he's asking himself. He leaves the next day. No incidents, no offense taken, no duel, but the silence he leaves behind feels like a sword half drawn. That evening, as the sun dips behind the tiled roofs, you sit with your family in the courtyard. The air is warm. The plum tree sways. Your son is asleep on your lap. You think of the envoy's words, of his sharp gaze, of how easily courtesy becomes combat when wielded correctly. You did not fight, but something passed between you, and you wonder who won. You wake to the sound of sparrows bickering on the rooftop, tiny territorial battles that echo your own week, though at least their disputes don't require formal paperwork. After the intensity of the Satsuma envoy's visit, the city feels like it's holding its breath. Nothing dramatic has happened. No missives have arrived. But tension clings to the air like summer humidity, hard to see, impossible to ignore. You move slower today, savoring the lull. Breakfast is grilled lotus root and miso soup. Your wife adds a soft-boiled egg, which is either affection or apology. You're too sleepy to tell. You step outside to tend the small garden. It's not much, just a rectangle of earth and stones, a few neat bushes, a bonsai that refuses to grow evenly, and one stubborn bamboo shoot you've declared your arch nemesis. But it's yours, and it needs weeding. Kneeling on the damp soil, you pluck tiny invaders from the earth while thinking about nothing. That's the real purpose of the samurai garden, not aesthetics, but meditation disguised as yard work. As you work, you hear footsteps, deliberate, familiar. It's your cousin, Noboru, all wide grin and loud opinions. He walks like a man trying to impress gravel. Ah, still fighting nature one weed at a time? He calls. You stand slowly, wiping your hands. She's winning, but I've filed an appeal. He chuckles, then grows serious. You heard about the peasant complaint in Urawa? You blink. The one about the land dispute? Noboru nods. 2 families, both claiming the same plot, and now one's accusing the other of forging land deeds. The magistrate wants someone neutral to look into it. You already know where this is going. You. Me, Noboru confirms, as if he's awarding a prize instead of a migraine. So after a quick change into your traveling attire, you set off toward Urawa. It's only a half-day's journey north, along roads lined with tall grass, rice paddies, and the occasional indignant goose. You ride a small gray horse who clearly believes it's above this sort of assignment. As you travel, the countryside unfolds in quiet layers. Farmers bent over rows of chutes, children running barefoot, scarecrows leaning like drunks in the wind. It's a different world out here, less rigid, more human. You arrive to find the two families already glaring across the village square. One man holds up a scroll with shaking hands. "This deed was signed by Magistrate Tashima in the year of the rabbit." The other scoffs. "He wasn't even alive then." You take the scroll, study it, and immediately see the problem. The ink is too fresh. No fading, no water damage, no wormholes. It's like finding a receipt from a medieval bakery printed with laser toner. "Did you store this in a magical humidity-free box?" you ask gently. The man falters. "It was well kept." You raise an eyebrow. "In the dirt under your house?" Historians still argue whether samurai were meant to act as administrators in times of peace, or whether the role was simply invented to give them something dignified to do. Whatever the origin, you're now effectively a land surveyor and a human lie detector. You inspect the disputed field. It's overgrown but valuable. Both families have cultivated portions of it. It's a mess. But you notice something interesting. The irrigation channels slope toward one family section. An advantage they could only gain by altering the original layout. You call both parties together. "I can't resolve this with ink," you begin, "but I can with water." They look confused. You lead them to the field and pour a bucket into the upper canal. It flows unmistakably toward one corner, a corner that, according to old maps, wasn't supposed to exist. There's silence. Then one man mutters, "We just needed more yield after the storm." You nod. Understandable, but deceit is like poor drainage. It ruins everything downstream. Eventually, you broker a compromise. One family gets legal title, the other receives a tax reduction and shared harvest rights for 5 seasons. No one is thrilled, but no one protests. You return home dusty, sunburned, and feeling vaguely like a hero in the world's most polite courtroom drama. That night, over grilled eggplant and chilled tofu, your daughter asks, "Did you ride into battle?" You pause. "I did, against forged documents and bad plumbing." She blinks. "Did you win?" You lean back. "I got the truth to flow in the right direction." She frowns. "That's not very exciting." "No," you say, sipping tea, "but it matters." Later, as you brush out your robe, your wife hums the old proverb, "A clear stream reflects no lies." You nod, remembering the way the bucket water glinted in the sun as it ran toward the hidden furrow. Not all victories come with fanfare. Some come with damp sleeves and dirt under your nails. Still, as you sharpen your writing brush for tomorrow's report, you can't help but smile. You didn't draw your sword today, but you defended something just the same. It begins with a letter, folded neatly, sealed in red wax, and delivered by a boy so small he disappears behind your garden gate until he waves the envelope like a flag. You unroll it slowly, expecting the usual summons or perhaps another complaint involving ducks trespassing on someone's koi pond. But this one is different. An invitation from the local magistrate's office to serve on a special investigation committee. Matters of integrity and justice, it reads, require the presence of a calm mind. That's bureaucratic poetry, for we don't know what's going on and hope you can figure it out without causing scandal. You tuck the letter into your sleeve, thank the messenger, who asks nervously if you're going to jail anyone, and walk back inside. Your wife glances up from sewing. New disaster? You nod. This time it's labeled special. That's how you know it'll be long. She chuckles. Wear the blue robe. It makes you look like you listen. She's not wrong. So you change, grab your travel case, and head into town. The magistrate's office is buzzing. Couriers rush past with scrolls. Officials mutter under their breath, and someone's having a very loud argument in a back room about whether a carp counts as taxable property. You're escorted into a side chamber where the magistrate, a portly man named Matsuda with a perpetual sheen of sweat, greets you with a bow and a cup of tea already too cold to be polite. Apologies, he says. We've had a situation in the Okabasho district. That's the entertainment quarter. You raise an eyebrow. Someone, Matsuda continues, has been distributing slanderous poetry, anonymous, but clever, about officials, possibly nobles, possibly even my cousin. He says the last part through clenched teeth. You accept the scrolls. They're tucked inside a cloth bundle with dramatic flair, like dangerous contraband. And in a way, they are. You sit down later and read the verses. They're funny, too funny, sharp, biting, and written in the kind of code that only insiders would understand. Jokes about garden parties where the sake was outshone by the host's second wife, or temple donations being spirited away by spirits with names that rhyme suspiciously with certain court officials. You read one aloud. Your wife, sewing beside the window, snorts. These are better than half the court poets, she murmurs. You nod, and more honest. But honesty can be dangerous, especially when it's anonymous. The shogunate doesn't tolerate satire, even polite rhyming satire. Historians still argue whether political censorship in the Edo period was a form of control or just an attempt to prevent mass embarrassment. Either way, you've just been tasked with finding the source of some very clever embarrassment. So you begin your investigation. First stop, the papermakers. The poetry is written on unusually fine rice paper, smooth grain, faint floral scent. Only a few shops in the district sell it. At one, the elderly owner tilts her head at you. That blend sold 4 sheets last week to a boy with inky sleeves and a suspicious cough. Suspicious how? You ask. She shrugs, like someone pretending to be sicker than they are. Theater kid, probably. You smile, You know the type. That leads you to a noodle stall across from a kabuki practice hall, where a young apprentice nervously drops a ladle when you approach. You don't accuse him. You don't need to. You just ask about the poem that made fun of a certain tax collector's comb-over. His eyes widen. Then he bursts into a sweaty monologue about how it was just a joke, and how he never meant for the verses to be copied, and how he definitely didn't leave them in the bathhouse by accident. You let him ramble. Then you say, "They're good, but if they get traced to someone important, they won't feel like jokes anymore." He nods, suddenly pale. You don't report him. Instead, you ask for the originals. He hands them over, sheepish, and promises not to share them again. You believe him, because his fear is real, and his talent is rare. Later, over tea with Magistrate Matsuda, you hand over a clean report. "No names," you say. "It seems the verses were the work of an actor's apprentice, already warned. No more copies circulating." Matsuda exhales. "So, we'll avoid another poetry-based uprising?" "Just barely." He laughs, then sobers. "Clever words are like knives, sharp, but easier to hide." You nod, sipping your tea, "until they stick into the wrong person." As you leave the building, you think about that boy, his talent, his timing, his risk. You remember something your old instructor once said during a lesson on blade polishing. The sharper the edge, the more likely it cuts the hand that wields it. You return home to find your daughter writing something in her notebook. You peek over her shoulder. It's a poem about you. You read, "My father walks like he's solving a puzzle, eyes narrow, like a hawk with taxes." You raise an eyebrow. She grins. "It's just for practice." You ruffle her hair. "Just don't share it with the bathhouse." She tilts her head. "What's in the bathhouse?" You laugh. "Trouble, and possibly a theater kid with a guilty conscience." That night, you lie in bed thinking about ink. How powerful it is. How dangerous. Your sword hasn't left its sheath in months, but today, a few lines of poetry nearly cause political embarrassment. Not blood, not betrayal, just words. And yet, you handled it. With questions, with listening, with understanding. That might be the most samurai thing you've done all month. You're deep in a dream involving a runaway rickshaw and a noodle bowl the size of a lake, when a knock at the gate jolts you awake. 3 short raps, urgent, official, and far too early. You sit up groggily, your hair a nest of dishonor. At the door stands an ash-gray messenger with an expression like wet stone. "Sir," he says, bowing, "the registry office requests your presence immediately." You sigh. "Let me guess, rice forgery again, or someone impersonating a monk for tax reasons?" The messenger shakes his head. "Missing samurai." That gets your attention. You dress quickly. By the time you arrive, the office buzzes with nervous energy. Clerks shuffle scrolls back and forth. One is whispering furiously, while another sketches a rough map on rice paper. At the center of it all stands Senior Clerk Omura, the most organized man in Edo, and the only one who files complaints by category of emotional damage. He gestures you over. It's Watanabe Hiroshi. He's been gone 3 days. You frown. Gone how? Left his quarters without formal leave. Missed 2 duties. His sword is still in his home. That last part makes your stomach tighten. A samurai doesn't leave home without his sword unless something's terribly wrong or terribly deliberate. You ask the usual questions. Who saw him last? A neighbor 2 nights ago, heading toward the river. Was he under stress? He did recently lose a promotion to a man 10 years younger. Enemies? Debts? Affairs? Omura hesitates. There are rumors that he was meeting with a Ronin. That's not just gossip, that's a powder keg with a match tucked inside. Ronin, masterless samurai, are legally tolerated but socially radioactive. In a rigidly ordered society, they float like ghosts, too proud for labor, too restless for peace. Sometimes wandering philosophers, sometimes hired muscle, always watched. You nod. I'll investigate quietly. You start with Watanabe's house. Neat, spare, not a speck of dust. His sword rests on the rack, spotless. Teacup still warm on the shelf. That means someone's been here recently. You check the desk drawers. Receipts, poems. 1 letter, unsigned, slipped under a tray. You pull it out. Read the first line. You are more than your title. You know that. The rest is philosophy, veiled references, emotional bait. It doesn't name names, but the tone is unmistakable. Persuasion. An invitation to something outside the system. Not rebellion, exactly, but freedom, whispered through metaphor. You show it to Ichikawa, later over sake. He reads it twice. Sounds like recruitment, he says finally. Careful phrasing, no crimes, but definitely subversion. You nod. Ronin trying to build something or destroy something. You follow Watanabe's trail through Edo's quieter alleys, down to riverside inns, old bathhouses, tea houses where the walls are thin and the gossip thick. At one, an elderly hostess remembers him. Very polite, she says, sweeping the floor. Sat with a quiet man. Didn't drink much. Talked about leaving the city. Where to? She shrugs. Said something about returning to a place before titles. That sounds cultish or poetic, often both. Your search leads you to a small inn on the outskirts, just before the roads stretch into countryside. You find Watanabe on the porch, barefoot, sipping barley tea and staring at the hills like they're whispering secrets. He doesn't flinch when he sees you. You're here to bring me back, he says. You nod. He gestures beside him. Sit then? You do. The tea is cold, the silence warm. I wasn't running, he says at last. Just trying to hear myself think. You study him. Why not tell someone? Because I knew what they'd say, that it's dishonorable to vanish, that my duty is everything, that my value is tied to my place in the ledger. He turns to you. Haven't you ever wanted to just vanish into something less rigid? You think of your garden, of the stolen poems, of diplomacy and missing land deeds and pretending to enjoy kabuki. Yes, you say. But, you add, I came back every time. He nods slowly. Historians still argue whether samurai who disappeared during peace times were traitors, victims of mental strain, or quiet revolutionaries. None of the options feel quite right. You offer him a compromise. Come back, quietly, say you were ill, reflect, rebuild, no punishment, but don't leave your sword again. He sips his tea. You really believe in the system still? You consider your answer. I believe in people who try to make it better from within. He sighs, but stands. That evening, you return to the city side by side, not as captor and fugitive, but as two tired men who've both flirted with the idea of running and chosen to stay. You file the report, leave out the details. Omura raises an eyebrow, but doesn't push. That night, over dinner, your wife studies your face. You found him. Yes. Was he lost? You think. Only for a little while. She pours you tea. You look older? You chuckle. That's just the lighting. Your daughter peers from her room. Did you catch a criminal? No, you say. Just caught someone falling. She stares. That's allowed? You nod. Sometimes it has to be. The moon hangs low, like a question mark written in silver, and you realize your sword didn't move again. But today, your words might have saved a man's life. The next morning arrives quietly, too quietly, the kind of morning that wraps around the house like gauze. You sit on the porch, sipping your first cup of tea, listening for something to break the stillness. A rooster calls in the distance. A gate creaks. Somewhere a dog barks, like it's remembering a bad dream. Then the clang of a bell. You freeze mid-sip. That's not a temple bell, it's a signal bell rung by guards at the city perimeter. You stand up slowly, brush your robe smooth, and wait. Moments later, a courier dashes into your street, panting, waving a message stick. Thieves, he says between breaths. Rice granary, northern warehouse, gone. You blink. Gone, gone. You're at the site within the hour. The northern warehouse stands at the edge of the canal district, usually guarded, but last night was the Lantern Festival. Half the city was watching paper dragons float along the river, and apparently the other half was stealing. Inside, the damage is surgical. The rice bins, dozens of them, are empty. Not spilled, not broken, just removed. The locks show signs of tampering. The guard claims he heard nothing. Because you were at the festival, you say. He wilts. Just briefly. For my nephew. He was playing flute. You nod. Then let's hope he played well, because it's going in the report. You crouch near one of the bins. Fine rice dust coats the floor. A faint trail leads out the back toward the canal. Smart. Heavy rice loads would be impossible to carry far by hand, but with boats. You follow the trail to the dock. Scrapes in the wood. A snapped rope. A boat, once tied here, is now gone. You find a fisherman who saw something. Dark boat, he says, squinting. Moved before dawn. No lanterns. Too quiet. Northbound. He nods. Low in the water, heavy. You report back to the magistrate's office where the room smells of ink and rising panic. Grain theft isn't just a crime, it's an earthquake in disguise. Rice is currency. Rice is power. Rice is politics with chopsticks. Omura greets you mid-scroll. They've struck 2 more storages, one in Kojimachi, one outside Asakusa. Same method, clean, organized, no violence. So not bandits, you murmur, too efficient. Smugglers, he offers. You shake your head. Smugglers don't steal 30 barrels of rice in silence. You stare at the map. 3 sites, each near water, each hit during major public distractions. You draw lines between them. They form a triangle. Someone's working a pattern. You check the ledgers. Who had access? Who had keys? Who had motive? One name appears at 2 warehouses. Assistant storekeeper Nakamoto. A man with no priors, no debts, and very boring handwriting. You pay him a visit. He opens the door with the expression of a man whose nerves have been tap dancing for days. "Sir?" he asks, trying to tuck his robe into itself nervously. You smile gently. Just checking records. Routine. You sit. Sip tea. Let silence drag out until it becomes uncomfortable. Then you ask, "How long have you been helping them?" His eyes widen, his hands shake, and then he sighs. 3 months, he mutters. They said it was redistribution, that it would help the famine in the north. You blink. What famine? They showed me letters. Starving families, villages underreporting to avoid taxes. They said the officials weren't listening. And you believed them? I wanted to. You understand the feeling. A system so orderly, it forgets to bend for the hungry. Historians still debate whether these rice raids were criminal enterprises or proto-social movements. Some call them food revolts, others early whispers of rebellion. You call them complicated. You bring Nakamoto in quietly. No shackles, no announcement, just a quiet escort to the magistrate's office, where Matsuda scowls and mutters about softness being mistaken for weakness. But you argue otherwise. There's no blood, you say, no fire, just theft and a message. And what's the message? That hunger waits for no approval. The magistrate doesn't like it, but he listens. You recommend sealing off the canals temporarily, increasing guard presence, not with swords, but with food shipments northward. Show the people they've been heard. It's approved, grudgingly. That night, you sit in your courtyard, watching fireflies blink across the stone lanterns. Your daughter joins you, holding a bowl of hot rice with pickled plum. She asks, "Why do people steal?" You chew the question, then answer, "Sometimes because they're greedy, sometimes because they're desperate, sometimes because they've been told to wait too long." She nods slowly. "Would you ever steal?" she asks. You think of the warehouses, of empty barrels and guilty clerks, of systems too rigid to flex. "I'd rather fix the rules," you say, "before someone breaks them." She doesn't say anything, just offers you a bite of her plum. You take it. It's sour and perfect. That night, as you close the gate, you glance up at the stars, wondering who else is out there in the dark, rowing silently, carrying food, carrying hope, carrying risk, and wondering if your quiet little corner of peace is enough to hold against tides no one sees coming. The season turns slowly, almost shyly. The air smells less like charcoal and more like damp earth. Plum blossoms drift onto your porch like snowflakes too delicate to stick. You find one in your sleeve, and for a moment it feels like a message. But from whom? The trees? The past? Your wife suggests a walk. You haven't taken one together in weeks. Not a purposeful stroll to the magistrate's office or the market, but an actual walk, the kind you used to take before responsibilities piled up like unread scrolls. So you go. You wear your lighter robe, the one with the faded crest. She wears a sash embroidered with peonies. Your daughter skips ahead, waving a fan she probably wasn't supposed to borrow. The streets are alive in that in-between way, too early for vendors, too late for ghosts. The fishmonger waves, the tofu vendor is sweeping. A dog barks half-heartedly at a straw hat tumbling down the street like it forgot where it belonged. You stop at the shrine. It's small, tucked between two ends with a stone fox whose nose has been worn smooth by decades of offerings and fingers. Your wife bows. Your daughter rings the bell. You press your palms together, but do not pray. You listen. That's when you hear it. Whispers, not divine ones, human. Behind the shrine, two men, low voices. One laughs sharply, the other mutters. You recognize the tone, not anger, not gossip. Plans, half-hidden urgency. Your wife raises an eyebrow. You give her a glance that says, "Later," and slowly move toward the sound. They don't notice you until you clear your throat. The taller one jolts. The other stiffens. "Good morning," you say evenly. It's a fine day for secrets. They try to play it off, but their shoulders betray them. You catch a glimpse of a parchment, quickly stuffed into a sleeve. Not stolen. Written. You don't demand, you offer. "Care for tea?" They hesitate, then nod. You guide them to a small stall and order 3 cups of barley tea, served in cracked bowls that have seen more truth than most scrolls. One man introduces himself as Takeshi, the other Shin. Both former clerks, both recently dismissed for efficiency reasons, which in government speak usually means we replaced you with someone whose uncle we owe a favor. You talk, casually at first, then more directly. Turns out they've been collecting testimonies from lower officials, not to smear anyone, but to map out where the system is breaking. Delayed wages, rotting rice rations, taxes miscalculated by scribes too tired to care. We're not trying to cause a stir, Takeshi says. We're trying to give voice to the people who keep the machine running and bleeding. You nod. And what will you do with it? Deliver it, Shin says, to someone who might listen. You sigh. Like me? They glance at each other. Maybe. You don't promise to fix everything, but you do promise to read it, carefully. They hand you the scroll. It's long, not angry, just weary. A record of cracks, not accusations, observations. The kind that go unnoticed because no one ever looks at the lowest rungs unless they snap. Historians still argue whether these grassroots reports were early forms of civic reform or just clever complaints with calligraphy. You think there's something else. Proof that people still care enough to whisper when shouting isn't safe. You bring the scroll to Omura. He reads it 3 times. These men, he mutters. Do you trust them? I trust that they've seen too much to stay silent. He grumbles. You always side with the underdog. No, you correct. I side with the honest. He eventually agrees to pass it up the chain, carefully, discreetly. You both know it may disappear into the bureaucratic ether, but sometimes that's the only path forward. Later that day, you take a different walk, alone this time. You wander the alley behind the shrine again, same wind, same stone fox. But now you see a tiny paper slip tucked under its paw, a haiku. Even the still gate knows the echo of footsteps. Spring remembers all. No name, just the poem. You pocket it. That evening, as you finish writing your report, your daughter crawls into your lap. Did you fix anything today? She asks. You consider the question, then answer. I listened. She thinks about that. That's not fixing. Not yet, you say. But it's where fixing begins. She yawns. You're always listening. You smile. That's my secret power. She's asleep minutes later. You stay up, copying the haiku into your personal notebook, the one with the pressed plum petals between its pages. The city is still tonight, but not silent, because the people in it are starting to speak. You wake to wind, not the sharp, bitter kind of winter, nor the soft breeze of spring, but a bold gust with attitude, shaking shutters, rattling roof tiles, slamming doors, just slightly too hard. It feels like a warning or a mood. Your robe flaps like a sail as you step outside. The sky is overcast, the light a dull silver that makes everything look older than it is. You head to the district office with your sleeves drawn tight, nodding to shopkeepers and children chasing flying paper that didn't ask to be airborne. At the office, Omura greets you with a frown, not his usual "the rice counts don't add up" frown. This one's different, more offended. "What did you do?" he asks, holding out a folded notice. You blink. "Today? Or in general?" He doesn't laugh, just hands you the letter. It's an invitation, stamped in red, from the Bugyo, one of the city's high commissioners. You're being summoned, not requested, summoned. You exhale slowly. Tea first? No time. Get your proper robe, and maybe your sword. You follow the instructions. The Bugyo's estate is not where you usually find yourself. It's a clean maze of manicured gravel, carefully placed stones, and guards who glance at your sandals like they're trying to remember if you're important. Inside, everything smells like incense and quiet authority. You're shown to a room with 3 people already seated. The Bugyo himself sits in the center, serene but sharp-eyed. To his left, a scribe with calligraphy-perfect posture. To his right, a man you've never seen, in robes a little too clean, with a smirk that says, "I own better secrets than you." The Bugyo speaks first. "You've been observing." You nod. "That's my job." "You've been recording." Another nod. "You've been listening." That one you let linger. "Yes." He gestures to the scribe, who unrolls a scroll. Your own report, the one you pass through Omura, the quiet testimony from the 2 clerks. "So," says the clean-robed stranger, "are you trying to stir discontent, or merely catalog it?" You don't flinch. "If there's discontent, it's already stirred. I just listen to the ripples." He snorts. "Poetic." The Bugyo raises a hand. Silence. "We are not here to scold," he says, "but we must know. Do you believe the concerns raised are real?" You hesitate, not because you're unsure, but because you know the room isn't asking for facts. It's asking for loyalty. You answer anyway. "They're not complaints," you say. "They're warnings, quiet ones, from people who still care enough to whisper." The Bugyo nods slowly. The smirking man doesn't. "We will take your words under advisement," he says, "which means we'll wait and see if anything explodes." You bow deeply and walk out with a carefully neutral expression. Outside, you exhale. That was not a conversation, that was a chess match, and your king is already pinned to the back row. On your way home, you stop by the tea house near the canal, the one with the soft chairs and the owner who sings off-key when she thinks no one's listening. She pours you a cup without asking. You look like someone saw through the clouds and didn't like what they saw. You sip. I got asked whether I'm loyal to the truth or the system. She raises an eyebrow. Which did you pick? You smile faintly. I picked a third thing, listening. She nods. That's dangerous. I know. That night a letter arrives at your gate. No seal, no sender. Inside is a single phrase. Keep watching. Not everything that flows downstream is water. You don't know who wrote it, but you recognize the message. There's more coming. Historians still argue whether moments like these were the seeds of major change or merely noise beneath the surface. Most of them agree, however, that those who noticed the tension first weren't always thanked for doing so. Back inside, your daughter is drawing birds. Your wife is kneading dough for dumplings. Did you get in trouble? Your daughter asks. You pause. Not yet. She frowns. Will you? You smile. If I do, I'll make sure it's for the right reason. You sleep lightly. The wind continues, knocking gently on the shutters. A sound like a finger on your shoulder reminding you peace isn't quiet. It's just well managed. And maybe, just maybe, it's about to be tested. By morning, the wind is gone, but something's changed. You feel it in the silence. Not the soft, content kind that fills a garden at dusk, but the kind that happens right before a storm decides which trees it likes least. You keep to your routine, tea, rice, a stroll through the garden where that stubborn bamboo shoot is still trying to overthrow the stones. But your mind hums like a bowstring. You spend the early hours reviewing scrolls at the office, trying not to imagine who else received that anonymous note about things flowing downstream. Then Omura appears in the doorway with a look that screams, I hate everything about today. You're being requested again, he mutters. Summoned? He grimaces. Requested, but only just. You raise an eyebrow. Who? He hesitates, then says the one name you'd hoped not to hear today. Lord Hanabusa. Ah, that explains the tightness in your chest. Lord Hanabusa is a daimyo of the old school, strict, humorless, and suspicious of anything that moves too fast or too quietly. His estate sits on the northern rise of the city, surrounded by cherry trees he orders trimmed into unnatural symmetry. It's said he can detect lies by listening to the way people exhale. You go. Of course. The estate is silent, not peaceful, just watched. Servants glide like ghosts. You're escorted to an inner room that smells of lacquer and old authority. Hanabusa sits behind a low writing desk. His robe is deep blue, like the bottom of a still lake. He doesn't offer tea. You've made yourself known, he says, without looking up. You bow. Only by doing what's asked, he finally looks at you. And yet people seem to speak freely in your presence. You remain silent. That seems safest. I've received reports, he continues, anonymous complaints, allegations, suggestions that certain officials are hoarding rice or misreporting harvest numbers. That dissent may be quietly encouraged by thoughtful listeners. You understand what this is, a warning wrapped in civility. I listen, you say, because it prevents shouting. He leans forward. But what happens when those whispers become wind, when they fan flames? You meet his gaze. Then we ask what caused the heat. He studies you. You sound like a philosopher. No, you say, just a tired civil servant with good ears. That earns a twitch of the eyebrow, almost a smirk, but not quite. I want names, he says finally, of those spreading discontent. You shake your head once, carefully. I don't have a list, just patterns, fractures, small signs. Then watch closer. You're dismissed. As you step back into daylight, your robe feels heavier. Or maybe the weight is somewhere else. On your way home, you stop at the canal. Watch a boat drift slowly, its pilot humming a tune so off-key it sounds intentional. The water's high, fast, carrying everything downstream without question. You think about the note again. Not everything that flows downstream is water. That evening you hold a small gathering. Informal, discreet, Ichikawa, Omura, a few trusted scribes. You meet in your garden where the wind can't listen and the stones don't talk. You outline what you've seen, the patterns, the tensions, the whispers too consistent to ignore. There's pressure, you say, not just from the people, but from above. And pressure doesn't just vanish, it finds cracks. Omura exhales. And what do? Strengthen the dam? Maybe, you reply, or build channels, safe ones. Ichikawa frowns. Channels, conduits, you explain. Spaces where complaints can be voiced without punishment, quiet forums, managed protests, even staged ones, if necessary. They look at you like you've grown a second head. You want to allow protest? Better than suppressing it and watching it erupt, you say. If the pot boils, remove the lid before it explodes. Historians still argue whether this period saw the beginning of controlled dissent or the slow crumbling of unquestioned obedience. Either way, someone had to say it first. You volunteer. They don't agree immediately, but no one walks out. That's something. Later that night, you return to your notebook. You write one line. When peace becomes pressure, silence is a fuse. You tuck it away, knowing full well it might be used as evidence against you someday. Your wife watches you from the doorway. You're thinking too loudly again, she says. You nod, trying to think ahead. She crosses the room, places a hand on your shoulder. Then think about this. Your daughter asked today, what happens if her father gets in trouble? You inhale slowly. What did you say? That he'd find his way home, even from trouble. You smile, just barely. Thank you. The wind returns that night, brushing across the shutters like a question it's too polite to ask out loud. And you lie in bed wondering whether the storm is still gathering or if it's already begun. The next day dawns with golden light. Not that you trust it. It's the kind of morning that wears a disguise. Sunlit courtyards, birds chirping like nothing's wrong, servants sweeping as if they're clearing cherry petals instead of nervous dust. But underneath all that brightness, you can feel the tremble, not a quake, just a hum, like something about to shift. You head into the city anyway. There's word of unrest at the eastern checkpoint. Nothing violent, just a gathering of townsfolk, mostly farmers and laborers, all requesting a clarification of taxes, which, in Edo speak, means they're tired of being poor and quiet about it. You walk, no escort, no fanfare. The scene at the checkpoint is tense, but not explosive. A cluster of maybe 50 people standing orderly, holding hand-copied petitions with respectful bows. Some wear patched robes. One woman clutches a rice scoop like it's a weapon of principle. A junior official paces nervously, trying to keep everyone calm with half-hearted reassurances. "Your voices are heard," he says. "Your scrolls will be reviewed in time." In time, a phrase that has never once satisfied a hungry child. You step forward, raise a hand. "Who speaks for the group?" you ask. A man steps forward, middle-aged, sun-darkened, the kind of face weather carves slowly. He introduces himself as Genji. His tone is steady, but behind it you hear desperation. "We don't want trouble," he says, "but the new tax on rice shipments, it's choking us. We lose a third of each harvest just getting it to the storehouse, and when we ask why, no one answers." You nod. "You came here peacefully?" "Yes." "Unarmed?" He opens his robe slightly to show nothing but a straw rope belt and an old ledger. You turn to the guards. "Let them speak." The guards hesitate. You don't. Now. Eventually, a space is cleared. The people kneel. Genji reads aloud the petition, clear, factual, polite, and crushingly detailed. Every sentence a quiet plea dressed as a list of numbers. You take it from his hands and read it again yourself. Then you say, "Give me 1 day." He looks skeptical. 1 day. To take this to someone who can do something. You? "No," you say. "But I know which windows to knock on." You return to the city and go straight to the Bugyo. Again. This time there's no waiting room, just a tense audience and a quiet room smelling faintly of camellia oil and regret. You don't make a speech. You hand over the petition and say, "They're asking, not demanding. That's a gift." The Bugyo reads silently. His expression doesn't change, but when he finishes, he says, "We'll review it." In time, his eyes flick up. You hold the gaze. "Soon," he says. You bow. Historians still argue whether early petitions like these ever reached the ears of true power, or whether they were merely a performance, a way to release steam without changing pressure. But something about Genji's petition feels different, not angry, just undeniable. The next day, a courier delivers a response, a temporary suspension of the transport tax for smaller villages, effective immediately, pending further review. It's not a solution, but it's a pause. You return to the checkpoint. Genji's there, same patched robe, same eyes. "They listened?" he asks. You nod. They blinked. That's the start of listening. He bows so deeply his forehead touches stone. And then, just like that, the people disperse. Calm, no shouting, no broken gates, just quiet relief. That night, as you soak in your wooden tub, your daughter sits on a stool nearby, folding paper cranes. "Did you fix more people today?" she asks. You sink deeper into the water. "A few," she frowns. "Why do so many things break?" You think about that, then say, "Because we try to make everything perfect, and sometimes perfect forgets to be kind." She folds another crane. "Are you kind?" You smile. "I try." She hands you the crane. "For your office," she says. You take it carefully. Small, neat, one wing slightly crooked, perfect. Later, your wife joins you in the garden. You sit in silence. Fireflies drift lazily over the pond. "You're tired," she says. "Only in my bones." She leans on your shoulder. "You can't carry it all." You nod. "But I can help hold the line." A breeze picks up, soft this time, carrying the scent of night blossoms and clean wood smoke. And as you close your eyes, you hear it again, not silence, but something softer, the hush that follows when people are heard, not solved, just heard. That may be enough for now. You can feel the shift in how people look at you. It's subtle, but it's there. In the bowed heads that last a second longer, the way vendors offer you the freshest persimmons without asking, the murmured thank yous from people you don't quite recognize. You've become something in between a samurai and a suggestion. It's flattering and slightly terrifying, because admiration is heavy, and expectations heavier still. You walk through the market on your way to the office, basket in hand, cloak slung casually, trying to look less like a city official and more like a man who enjoys radishes. It doesn't work. A boy selling fans tugs your sleeve. "Sir, my uncle says you're the one who made the tax vanish." You blink. "Only temporarily." He grins. "That's better than anyone else ever did." You buy a fan, plain, bamboo-framed, with a painted crane, and keep walking. The city feels warmer today. Not in temperature, just in temperament. Less brittle, more elastic. At the office, Omura greets you with a nervous cough. You recognize that cough. It's the "please don't yell when I tell you this" kind. "There's a new posting," he says. You pause mid-step. Where? Not where. What? They've reassigned you. You set your basket down. To what? He shifts. Civic oversight. Peace liaison. You stare. That's not a real title. It is now. You sit slowly. Explain. Omura hands you a scroll. It's short. Too short, which means too vague. You read, appointed to monitor public morale, reduce tensions, and provide reports on civil sentiment. Authority flexible. Boundaries to be interpreted in context. In other words, you're now the city's unofficial ear, and maybe unofficial fuse cutter. You laugh once, then say, they've turned me into a pressure valve. Omura shrugs. Better than a scapegoat. He's not wrong. Still, this means change. New duties, new hours, fewer reports about water rationing, and more conversations with people who talk in sighs and sideways glances. You start that afternoon. Your first stop is the tea house near the south gate, the one frequented by day laborers, dockhands, and retired soldiers who pretend not to miss the noise. You order a bowl of pickled daikon and sit near the back, where the shadows listen better. A man beside you is ranting about bridge repairs. No one listens, he mutters. They send 3 men to patch a hole the size of a boat. 2 of them hold ropes. The third just smokes. You nod. Another man chimes in about rice inspections. Too many officials, not enough eyes. They all use the same stick to measure, but it bends depending on who's holding it. You listen, mostly. Eventually, you speak. I'll take it up the chain, you say. Someone scoffs. And where does that chain end? The same place our taxes vanish? You smile faintly. Sometimes it ends here, with someone writing it down. That earns you a long look, and eventually another story, and another. You leave with a full notebook and an emptier bowl. Next stop, the Shrine District. There, the priests are arguing, not with each other, but with the town's musicians, who claim a new ordinance limits evening drum practice. You hear both sides. Mediate. Suggest a compromise. Smaller drums, softer rhythms, daylight hours only. Everyone grumbles, then bows. On your way home, you stop by the paper shop. The old owner peers over her spectacles. Heard they gave you a fake job, she says cheerfully. Real job, you reply. Fake authority. She nods. That's how you know it's important. You buy fresh ink and 3 brushes. At home, your daughter meets you at the gate holding up a scroll. It's a story, she says, about a fox who steals complaints. You smile. Does he eat them? No, she says. He folds them into boats and sails them away. You ruffle her hair. That fox sounds familiar. She grins. He wears a blue robe. Inside, your wife has lit the lanterns early. She serves you tea before you even ask. They made you a listener, she says softly. You sip. I always was. She sits across from you. But now you have to be. And she's right. Historians still debate whether these civic liaisons were genuine reforms or just clever distractions, but some records show the cities with them saw fewer revolts, more poems, longer lives. You open your daughter's scroll that night. The fox story ends not with a fight, but with a garden, full of folded paper boats blooming like lotus flowers. You add it to your shelf. Because if peace is a garden, maybe your job now is to keep it watered, quietly, steadily, without waiting for thanks, just folding the complaints and letting them float. You sit in the shade of your veranda, brush in hand, fresh ink by your side, trying to finish a report you started 3 days ago. It's supposed to summarize civil sentiment in Edo's northern quarters, what people feel, what they fear, what they say, when no one's really listening. You've written the title 8 times. Each version is slightly more poetic than practical. So far, Whispers and Lantern Smoke is your favorite. Your wife passes behind you, pausing to glance at your page. Still titling? I'm pretending to title while secretly panicking, you say. She pats your shoulder. Good. That's the samurai spirit. Truth is, writing down people's pain feels presumptuous. You aren't the one overpaying for wet grain. You aren't the one getting scolded by a temple official for lighting incense with the wrong hand. You're just the one with the ink. Still, you try. You write about the old woman who sells sweets from a woven tray and worries about her son who hasn't returned from a pilgrimage that should have taken a month. About the blacksmith who's training a left-handed apprentice and fears the other guilds will mock them both. About the young monk who quietly blesses both the living and the unregistered ghosts that locals insist never left their homes. You record it all, not as grievances, but as fragments of a city trying its best to hold itself together with straw string and shared silence. Halfway through, a boy from the magistrate's office appears at your gate panting. There's a fire, he says. Outer Rice Ward, West District. You stand. No sword, no time. The fire is already dying by the time you arrive. A grain store partially collapsed. No fatalities, thank the gods, but 2 workers suffered burns. One lost a week's wages, running back in to grab the account books. Not heroic exactly, but deeply bureaucratic. The fire was small, but fires here always whisper louder than they burn. Crowds form. Rumors bloom. Someone mutters, arson. Someone else, retaliation. They're hiding something. You step into the soot-blackened interior where the scent of wet ash clings to everything. The walls are streaked with smoke, and the bins are half charred. You find the foreman sitting on a sack of damp grain, head in his hands. You ask the usual, what did you see? Who was near the building? Any strange smells before the smoke? He answers in half sentences, fractured. Eventually, he looks up and says, You think this was politics, don't you? You hesitate. I think fire's a very convenient messenger, you reply. You collect what you can. Testimonies, fragments of gossip, a bent nail that may or may not be relevant, and you pass the rest to the fire steward, who nods solemnly and asks no questions. Back at the office, Omura frowns over your notes. "This wasn't an accident," he says. "No," you agree. "Reprisal? Or warning?" The room quiets. You both know what this means. Things are fraying. Someone's using smoke to make a point. Historians still debate whether these isolated acts of sabotage were coordinated, early signs of rebellion, or spontaneous frustration. But they all agree on one thing. These fires marked a shift, not in violence, but in visibility. You draft a report. This time, no poetry, just facts, clean and sharp. But that evening, before you seal it, a courier arrives again, a thin scroll, no seal. Inside, just one phrase: "Fire is honest. It leaves no bureaucrats behind." You stare at it longer than you should. Then you light a lantern and sit by the pond. Watch the reflection tremble. Your daughter pads over, barefoot. She's holding another crane. "Does the city feel sad?" she asks. You consider. Not sad, but maybe tired of being quiet. She hands you the crane. This one's blue with a red dot on the wing. "For luck," she says. You smile. "Do I need luck?" She nods. "You're in the middle now. That's where things get noisy." You laugh softly. "That's very wise for someone who still eats pickles with her fingers." "I learn from the best," she grins. Your wife joins you later, setting down a bowl of warm soup. "No sword again today?" she asks. "No sword," you say, "just ashes." She doesn't ask more. The city sleeps uneasily that night. You feel it in the air, the way even the dogs bark less, like they know something old is shifting its weight. And deep down, you wonder how many more fires it will take before someone decides to light one on purpose, with an audience, and a message that doesn't come folded into paper birds. You wake before the roosters, not on purpose, just involuntarily, the way someone does when the mind refuses to wait for the body. The world outside is still gray, that slow, cold kind of morning where the mist hasn't yet made up its mind whether it wants to rise or cling to the ground like a nervous cat. You sit at your desk. The inkstone is already prepared. Your wife, probably. She's been doing that more often lately, wordlessly anticipating that your days begin with brushwork rather than breakfast. You take out the report on the fire and begin writing the final paragraph. This time, your words are less measured, more urgent. You include names, patterns, not accusations, just carefully drawn arrows that any reader could follow. You don't sign your name with the usual flourish, just the plain characters. No poetry today. When the sun finally breaks through, you're summoned again. Not by scroll, by a runner with no insignia and shoes too clean to be a courier's. Omura raises his eyebrows as you prepare to leave. "If I don't come back," you say dryly. burn my notes. He sighs. If you don't come back, I'll probably need to. You're escorted, not to the usual magistrate hall, but to an inner garden tucked behind an official residence you've only heard rumors about. The kind of place where policies are decided with fans and silences, not stamps. There you find 3 men seated on woven mats. One is the Bugyo, the second, Lord Hanabusa, the third, a stranger in travel robes. His hair is streaked with gray, but he moves like someone who could still end a duel in 3 strokes. You bow deeply. They don't speak at first. Just let the wind do the talking, rustling the bamboo, teasing your sleeves, reminding you that you are decidedly the lowest-ranking soul in the room. Then the stranger speaks. You're the one they call the listening blade. You blink. That's new. He smiles faintly. A man with no sword, but 1,000 sharp questions. That's the rumor. You offer a bow. Rumors are unreliable. Are they? Hanabusa says, not smiling. The Bugyo unfolds a scroll. Your latest report. We've read this. You say nothing. The stranger gestures toward you. You've walked between the cracks, heard what most of us never do, and yet you haven't demanded change. I'm not here to demand, you reply, only to warn. Warn whom? You pause. Anyone who still believes peace is a default. That earns another long silence. Finally, the stranger nods. The shogun is considering civic reforms. You raise an eyebrow. Considering? Considering, he repeats, but carefully. Too much change and things crack. Too little and they rot. You nod slowly. That sounds familiar. We want your observations, he says, directly, regularly. A pause. Then, but quietly. You bow again. Understood. Historians still debate whether this was the beginning of formal civil intelligence networks in Edo, quiet systems where officials listen through samurai like you. Some call it benevolent oversight, others bureaucratic eavesdropping. You just call it useful. Your new position comes with no title, no seal, and no schedule, just responsibility. You leave that garden with your thoughts buzzing like hornets. By the time you return home, your daughter is waiting with a string of new cranes. She's been folding obsessively every color you own, even the scrap paper with grocery lists and half-done ink tests. These are for protection, she says. How many do I need? You ask. She counts. At least 100, maybe more. You ruffle her hair. I'll need more paper. She grins. I already took some. Of course she did. That night, you begin your first unofficial report. It's not addressed to anyone. It starts without a title, but the words come easily. You write about voices, the way people speak differently depending on where they're standing, on stone, on wood, on dirt. You write about silences, how some are comfortable and others are barbed. You write about the city, not as a place, but as a living thing, breathing, shifting, listening, even when it pretends not to. Your wife passes behind you again. Still writing, you nod. For someone, someday. She pours tea. Don't forget to sleep. You won't, but not yet, because the air tonight feels balanced, like a tightrope, and maybe, just maybe, you've learned how to walk it. You spend the next few days walking, not rushing, no summons, no fires, just the rhythm of sandals on worn stone, sleeves brushing against market stalls, nods exchanged with shopkeepers who've started saying, "Welcome back," instead of "Good day." The city hums differently now. It hasn't changed, but the tension has softened at the edges, like rice cooling in the shade. You suspect it's less because of anything you've done, and more because people believe, maybe foolishly, that someone up there is finally listening. You visit the blacksmith. He's teaching the left-handed apprentice how to strike in rhythm without burning his own foot. You pause, admire the form, and offer one tiny suggestion. Try holding the tongs like chopsticks. The boy laughs. The master grunts, which is probably gratitude. Later, you stop by the tofu vendor. He asks if the rice ward has been rebuilt yet. Not fully, you tell him, but they've started. The walls are sturdier this time. Ashes, it turns out, make for strong foundations. You pass the small shrine near the southern bridge, the one where you first heard the whispers behind the stone fox. A new note is tucked beneath its paw. It's a different hand this time. No poem, just 4 plain words. Still watching, still waiting. You don't know whether to be comforted or unsettled, maybe both. That evening, Omura finds you at the office. He's holding 2 cups of plum wine and a scroll with no title. "What is it?" you ask. "Your new appointment. Official this time." You read it. It's a vague description of your current duties, now wrapped in formal kanji and stamped with red lacquer. Your name is spelled correctly. That's a surprise. At the bottom, one sentence stands out: to serve as a mirror between the governed and those who govern. You smirk. I've been called worse. Omura lifts his cup. To mirrors. You clink the cups gently. Later that night, your daughter asks if being a samurai still means swords and battles. You think for a while before answering. "It means protecting people," you say. "With words?" "With whatever works," she nods. "Then I want to be a samurai too." Your wife overhears and rolls her eyes fondly. She already is. You should see the way she argues about pickles. You laugh. The next morning, a monk passes by your gate with a bell. It rings once, long and slow, echoing down the alley like a reminder that life continues whether you pay attention or not. You step outside, fan in hand, and breathe. There's a cherry petal stuck to your sandal, the first of the season. Spring again. You remember what someone told you long ago, that samurai life was supposed to be violent, that duty meant blood, that honor meant dying well, and yet here you are, still breathing, still writing, still folding cranes instead of swinging steel. Historians still argue whether men like you diluted the code of the warrior or evolved it. Some say peace made the samurai weak. Others say it revealed who they really were. You no longer care what they decide, because as you sit on your veranda sipping the last of the plum wine, you realize something. Sometimes the most unexpected life is also the truest, not in battle, but in balance, in noticing things others ignore, in listening to voices that might have gone unheard, and in finding somehow that you didn't just survive peace, you lived it. So now the candles burned low, and the city within our story returns to its quiet. The streets empty, the lanterns fade, and that garden, the one tucked behind the samurai's house, sways gently in the night breeze, filled with the scent of plum blossoms and ink. You imagine him there, still seated on his porch, his daughter asleep, curled under a cotton blanket, his wife humming softly while folding the laundry by moonlight, and him resting finally, not just his body, but his mind, because the listening is done, the writing is finished, and for tonight, at least, the world is still. The questions fade with the wind. Was he a warrior, a spy, a scribe? Or was he something else entirely? Someone who never swung a sword, but protected hundreds with patience and paper? There's a kind of beauty in that, don't you think? So let your breath soften, let your shoulders loosen, and imagine that paper crane, the very last one drifting down a still stream, carried gently, peacefully into the mist. The world doesn't always need heroes. Sometimes it just needs someone who notices. Good night, friend. Sleep easy.